The news never stops on Fox 5 Atlanta. We appreciate you joining us online as we examine the mayoral race and so many other races happening around our state and our city this evening. We're joined by Jeff Dickerson and Phil Kent, both of the Georgia Gang. And guys, it's been a hectic race and a crowded one thus far as we wait for results from, I guess, Fulton County is the outstanding county right now. They're always kind of slow and go on election nights, whether it's national or locally. But I'm interested just in your general thoughts thus far of the race, the one that everybody's talking about, and that's the race for Atlanta mayor. Jeff?
Well, you know, it's been a long, crowded race, and for in the history of Atlanta mayoral races, probably the most boring. And that's in large part because of the large number of people who've been in this race. 11, 12, 13 candidates initially, now down to about 8 or 9. Still a very crowded field. I think that it's confused voters. I think that it's turned voters off. As of just election eve, you had 15% of voters still undecided, not knowing which candidate they were going to back. And so it's been a real sea change, I think, in Atlanta mayoral politics. And in the mayor's race in particular, where in the past we've had folks who were in the race almost designated, or you know what I mean, by some machine politics. And this time around, it's been a free-for-all.
Phil, this has been a crowded race, as Jeff just pointed out, but there are two candidates who are expected to go into a runoff tonight. That is Mary Norwood, who we know from the last mayoral race and who came pretty close to winning over Kasim Reed, and Keisha Lance Bottoms. Tell me how these two candidates have been leading this thing and why they've stood out over the rest of the field.
Well, I think there's a couple factors here, and Jeff made some good points, and I think this is historic. You have, as you're pointing out, two females that are the, I think we're both predicting that'll get into a runoff tonight, and you also have a racial component. We have not had a white mayor of Atlanta since 1974, and the demographics have changed a little bit. We can talk about that later, but I think that grassroots support is very important. You pointed out, yes, Mary Norwood came very close 8 years ago in becoming mayor, just missed it. And I think that Keisha Lance Bottoms also has grassroots support, and she has the support of the incumbent mayor, which is obviously important to her. So you've got two powerhouses, and we can talk about this too. The key is to turn out your base, and we will be seeing it's low turnout from what we're hearing, so we'll have to see how their base turns out.
Jeff, Keisha Lance Bottoms won the support of Kasim Reed in this race, which means a lot in terms of funding and that grassroots support that Phil just spoke of. How much did that endorsement help, and how much will it help going forward in the event that she's in a runoff with Norwood?
I think that it was huge for her. We've had a lot of folks who endorsed in this race. Andy Young, whose voice has been huge in past mayoral races, and others, civil rights legends in the city of Atlanta. The one endorsement that counted the most this time around was Kasim Reed's. Even before the endorsement, we really didn't see all that much momentum. Once that endorsement happened, she kicked into high gear, and you saw a lot of money being donated into her campaign and a lot more support. So that just a couple of days ago, everything flipped. Mary Norwood has been on top throughout this race, at least from a plurality standpoint, with somewhere between 25 to 30% of the vote.
That's gone back and forth, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and now Keisha Lance Bottoms, this last poll, was on top.
And Phil, has Mary Norwood, even though she will be a likely contender in the runoff, should we be headed in that direction, has she lost some of her luster from the last time that she ran against Kasim Reed, or is she still as viable a candidate now as she was back then?
I don't think she's lost any luster. Whether you like her or don't like her, I think everyone agrees that she is everywhere. She goes into all of the neighborhoods. She's known for that. She's focused in her commercials on that. She listens. We talked a little bit before we came on this state senate race. Part of that extends into the city of Atlanta limits in Buckhead. And there's some Republican-leaning voters there that'll be in that primary, and they'll probably be voting for Mary Norwood or Peter Ammon, and so that will pump up some votes some. But I think she's very competitive. I do think, I'll disagree with Jeff somewhat, I think that it's a two-edged sword with Mayor Reed's endorsement. I think that, yes, he does have clout, there's no question, but as we look at past election cycles, his endorsed candidates lost for city council and for school board. So I'm curious, and I'm sure Jeff is too, I'm curious as to whether his coattails will help that much.
Well, Jeff, this is a race that is dominated by Democratic candidates. Atlanta is a dominantly Democratic city. Where am I to go if I'm a Republican who wants to weigh in on this race? Which candidate is attracting Republican voters in a Democratic race?
Clearly, that candidate overwhelmingly is Mary Norwood. She identifies herself as an independent. Others have identified her, including the State Democratic Party, as a Republican. And so I think that if you're a conservative voter, you're a Republican voter, you're more inclined to support her. Interestingly, despite his stances, Peter Ammon has also gotten a good bit of Republican support, particularly from the north side of Atlanta, where most of the Republicans live. And so between those two candidates, they've gotten the lion's share of Republican support.
All right. This is a race that we're going to be watching all night, both here online as we join you on Facebook and on our online channels, and on the air tonight when you join us for Fox 5 News at 10 and, of course, News Edge at 11. But there are a couple of other big races happening, and that is for Atlanta City Council president, and there's a Senate district seat up for grabs, too. Let's focus first on this city council presidency, which will be a significant role for one of these candidates to fill.
Well, that's right. You've got three candidates that we're going to be watching tonight, C.T. Martin and Alex Wan and Felicia Moore, and they're all city council people. They all have council experience, which is good. I think we're predicting a runoff again in this one.
And the city council and the mayor work so hand in hand in so many cases, along with the chief of police, that these are all agencies and departments and political posts that need to kind of work well together.
Well, that's right. And Jeff and I were talking a little earlier about Felicia Moore. I happen to like her because, as a longtime journalist, I think she has been very transparent. She's outspoken. She's kind of perceived as a watchdog. However, she doesn't get along on a lot of policy issues with the current mayor, to your point about working together.
Yeah.
I think C.T. Martin and Alex Wan are a little more, I'm trying to find the right word, perhaps flexible in terms of policy issues.
Jeff, when we talk about the city council presidency and as it relates to the mayoral race, Atlanta is such a significant city regionally for the Southeast. We draw in a lot of business, the conventions and corporations. We're trying to woo Amazon to come to our city. So these are big jobs to fill and jobs that can not only have an impact on our city, but a national impact as well. I mean, Atlanta has grown and become such a significant voice in national politics. So how will this race and the way our city council stack up will reflect nationally?
I think that it does reflect nationally. You saw that in the New York Times piece a couple of days ago, that this is in fact a national story. The focus was actually on the racial component of this race and the likelihood or possibility that we might elect the first white mayor in 44 years. But just in terms of the economic importance and significance of the city and the Southeast and the nation, everybody's going to be watching Atlanta and what we do in this election and whether or not we're going to be poised to take advantage of the kinds of opportunities that you're talking about with Amazon's second headquarters and so many more. You have seen so much growth and so many companies moving here with the alliance between a Republican governor and a Democratic mayor in the city of Atlanta that I think the next person is going to want to keep that momentum going.
Phil, let's talk about something that you brought up before we went on, and that is the Senate District 6 race, which you called a free-for-all of sorts. Why did you characterize it that way?
Well, it's a special election in this pivotal Senate district, and it's been represented by Senator Hunter Hill. Now, he resigned the seat. That's why it's open, and he's running for governor, and it's a very pivotal seat. The Republicans in the state Senate control the state Senate with a 2/3 supermajority. if the Republicans lose this seat, their supermajority is broken. So the Democrats obviously know that. They're targeting it. A lot of money is coming in. You've got about 5 Republican candidates and 3 Democrat candidates. There will be a runoff. I don't see anyone getting 51%. It's very interesting because it's made up of you go into Smyrna and Buckhead, you swing into part of Sandy Springs, and you go up to a little bit of East Cobb. It's a Republican-leaning district because it was held by a state senator, but Hillary Clinton won the district last November. This is why it's so intriguing to everybody on both parties. And the Cobb side, interestingly, is gone Democratic. The demographics have changed. Hunter Hill always won by the Fulton County vote. The big question tonight is how much turnout will the Fulton County vote be to help one of those Republicans? If I looked in the crystal ball, I think maybe Leah Aldridge, an attorney, female, very, very good candidate on the issues, could come in. And I think on the Democratic side, there's Jen Jordan, and she might get into a runoff with the Republican.
Now that we're talking about state politics, Jeff, there was speculation going into the presidential election that Georgia might be turning purple, if you will, and that is straddling the line between being a Democratic state or a Republican one. That turned out not to be the case in the election of Donald Trump, who comfortably won the state. But the city of Atlanta in particular, when we talk about the mayoral race, is evolving and is changing. Talk to me about how the voter demographic this time around is affecting the mayoral race.
Well, you know, you have an awful lot more white voters in the city of Atlanta now than you did 8 years ago even. And this is driven primarily by an influx of urban pioneers, millennials moving into in-town communities like Inman Park, the old Fourth Ward. The question is whether or not, while we know that the demographic shift has taken place, the question is whether or not they're going to vote. You have 250,000 eligible voters in the city of Atlanta. We're expecting maybe 15% of them to come out and cast a vote. As we look at these vote counts this evening, and so the question is, yes, they're in the city, they're living in the city, they're engaged, they are engaged, I think, in some public policy issues, and they enjoy a good bit of the amenities of the city, going on the belt line and things like that. Yeah. The question is whether they're going to go into the voting booth.
All right, and you know, Keisha Lance Bottoms, as we said, Mary Norwood seemingly leading this race, and seemingly, at least at this point, if the polls are reflective of what's going to happen tonight, headed into a runoff. Phil, I'm wondering why the others, Caesar Mitchell, Michael Sterling, Kathy Woolard, Kwanzaa Hall, all familiar names in local politics here. What was it about their candidacies, Vincent Fort, who Bernie Sanders came in and endorsed, didn't catch on and didn't light on fire?
Well, there's several factors. We talked about grassroots support, which a lot of them just didn't catch fire. We, of course, know that fundraising is very important. And thirdly, with the African-American array of candidates, that vote is fractured. And, of course, Jeff's making a good point about turnout. It's going to be down today, and it's a huge problem trying to get your folks to the polls. And we haven't talked about something, too, that I think has turned off a lot of people. We see, especially among millennials, that Jeff's talking about some cynicism. People think that government is not responsive to them because we have an ongoing federal corruption probe into City Hall. And I don't think that's helping Keisha Lance Bottoms. I think it's helping some of the other candidates. If you're on council,
why do you say that? Is that the association with the current administration?
That's right. That's right. And so she's tied with the mayor. Now, as we pointed out earlier, there's good things to be tied to the mayor, but then there's this bad thing. There's an ongoing probe. You're talking about vendors, and the local paper, the AJC, has talked about the airport vendors, and that's been in the news. And it's really eclipsed a lot of those lesser candidates. And I think if you're a lesser candidate, you've got to make news. And if I was their consultant, I'm saying, get out there and make some news. Well, they have not, by and large.
Jeff, as we head into a runoff race, up until this point, although there have been, negativity has been peppered into the race thus far, not a lot, But once this does go into a head-to-head, we're likely to see a lot more dirty politics, so to speak, and negative campaigning happening.
Well, I don't know if it's going to be dirty politics of the sort that we've seen in this general election and the runoff, because you're going to have two main candidates going at each other. It's probably going to be more substantive opposition. And I think that, you know, if in fact we are right, as we are predicting very early this evening, that it would be Keisha Lance Bottoms and Mary Norwood, Keisha Lance Bottoms is going to say that she's the only Democrat in the race, as she, you know, as she has thus far, and she's going to say that Mary Norwood is a Republican. That really stuck in the runoff 8 years ago with Kasim Reed, when she was called a Republican, and he was able to squeeze out that margin of victory just over a little over 700 votes. This time, she's going to be cast, I think, as a Trump supporter, which eclipses being merely a Republican. And that's going to hurt her. And I think that it could hurt her badly, particularly among younger voters and others in the city of Atlanta. And so she's going to have a rough time.
And back to the race part of this, and Keisha Lance Bottoms and Mary Norwood. Obviously, Mary Norwood has wide and broad appeal among many in the African American community. So does Keisha Lance Bottoms. Is the support that Norwood got when she ran against Kasim Reed among African Americans still going to be there this time around, in your judgment?
Well, you know, it's there in the general election. And so, and a lot of those voters who support Mary Norwood, support her, I'm talking about people on the South Side, African Americans, because they know her. You know, she was there. She was at the Senior Citizen building. She was she came to their coffee clutch or whatever. And when it comes right down to it, between a candidate like Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is from their community, and Mary Norwood, who just visits, it's going to be, they might very well flip and go with Keisha. But that Mary Norwood is readily able to get 15% or more of the African American vote is phenomenal. It really is. And it says a lot about her and her retail politics and getting out there and getting to know people and people getting to know her. She's done it consistently, and she's done it very well.
The NAACP came out and characterized and framed this as a race for mayor, which is framed around race, if you will. If Mary Norwood succeeds and becomes the next mayor of Atlanta, will the NAACP stand behind her and support her ultimately?
I don't know whether the NAACP would. I know that Mary will be, as she advertises, a people for everybody. If she were to win this race, I really do think that she has a record of reaching out. I think that she'll continue to reach out. And I think that she'll try to be a mayor for every quadrant of the city.
All right, guys, let's talk about another huge race going down tonight.
Let me just add to that. I have to laugh because I know Mary Norwood. I'm a Trump supporter, but she's no Trump supporter, and she truly
that would be
is
a stretch, wouldn't it?
That is a terrible stretch, and you got to be careful stretching, because Jeff made the point that people know her and they know she's not a Trump supporter. She's an independent.
But if you plant seeds of doubt in people during a political campaign, whether it's in the form of an ad or even making an egregious accusation like that, it sticks with some people.
Yes, it can. Or on the other hand, it can backfire.
Yeah.
Because Jeff points out people know her and they laugh when they hear that, if they know her.
Well, speaking of backfiring, I want to call your attention, and folks who are watching on Facebook are likely political junkies, so we can head up to Virginia and this ad that ran against Ed Gillespie of the pickup truck with the Confederate flag, trying to run down children who are presumably DACA children and trying to capture and run them out of town. How do you all see the Virginia race going down tonight? The last time we checked, it was really neck and neck in a tied race. Any thoughts?
Well, the Fox poll, you're right, had it very close in the margin of error that came out a couple days ago. I think it will be very close. Again, turnout is the key. That ad did backfire. Was done by some radical group called the Latino Victory Fund, and then the Democrat candidate was put in a very awkward position. He was doing very well, but then he took 4 different positions in 2 days on that ad and finally condemned it and said it wasn't a good thing and he had nothing to do with it. So whenever you're on defensive and having to explain things like that is certainly not good. And I think Ed Gillespie has united the Republicans the Trump wing and the establishment wing are all behind him. And of course, there's always local politics involved in Virginia. But that's why it's so tight. And I think it would really, the Democratic Party is going to have to do more soul searching if Gillespie wins. You saw the Donna Brazile bombshell on how Hillary rigged the Democratic primary against Bernie Sanders. A lot of Democrats are upset, and I think that when you see Ed Gillespie uniting his Republican base, it's going to come right down to the finish line.
Jeff, do you think Virginia is a reflection or a bellwether, if you will, on what's happening nationally right now? It is a purple state.
You're exactly right, and you used the right word. It is a bellwether, particularly for Democrats. They've got to pull out a victory in Virginia tonight. There's no question about it. This foretells whatever is likely to happen in the midterm elections, right, for Democrats. And if they want to get some seats in Congress, they're going to have to win Virginia tonight.
How accurate do you think the polling is? I mean, do you still think that the polling was so off in the presidential race? Do you think such will be the case in Virginia, or do you think the pollsters have gotten it or learned from their mistakes from the last time around?
I don't think. I still have a hard time trusting polling these days, and it's not just because of Trump, but because of the Ossoff race, the 6th congressional district here just a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
It was so far off, and reports, for instance, even in the mayor's race, that some of these polls are polling people, 70% of whom are on landlines. I mean, where do you find a place where 70% of people are on landlines? You're going to get a very skewed result with that kind of polling.
I don't even have a landline.
Well, I still do. I'm archaic, but I like to hear what the pollsters say. But anyhow, I agree with Jeff on this. And you talk to pollsters, and I wish we had Matt Towery here. He could tell us a little bit more. But it's very difficult to not only poll, as Jeff is pointing out, with landlines fading, and millennials won't stay on an iPhone for more than 5 seconds. And also, all the pollsters agree that we're missing the rural white voter. We, of course, missed that last November.
Let me jump in real quick, Phil. We have breaking news. Fox News is projecting now in Virginia. Anybody want to take a guess?
Gillespie.
No.
Okay.
Democrat Ralph Northam is going to win the governor's race in Virginia.
Right. Okay. But they could be wrong in their exit polling.
They could be. But Fox usually kind of vets these things pretty good. But you could be right. But they're projecting now a win for Northam, taking over for Terry McAuliffe, who handed him the mantle. And talk about incumbent support.
Yes.
Northam had the full support of Terry McAuliffe, and perhaps this Donna Brazile thing was too little too late in the end.
I think so, absolutely. And let's hope that holds, because if it does, it bodes well for Democrats nationally.
All right.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that it's interesting that the Virginia legislature is controlled by the Republicans, so there's a lot of vote splitting in Virginia.
Well, that metropolitan corridor is very powerful.
It is.
That's right.
And dense.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Okay, guys, we're going to stick with this throughout the night. We're going to sign off right now, but we're going to come back as the night unfolds, as Fulton County finally gets around to reporting some results.
Yeah.
Hopefully that happens.
Did you bring your sleeping bag?
Let's hope that's not the case. We don't like sleeping here, which we've done before on snowy nights. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you back here online coming up toward the top of the hour. I'm Tom Haines. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon.